If you've ever pictured winter in the Middle Ages as a cozy, candlelit season of crackling fires and snug stone rooms, I've got some brisk reality for you. For most people, it felt like living inside a very determined icebox. Fairy tales love castle hearths and velvet cloaks. Peasants mostly got frost, nipped ears, stubborn smoke, and floors so cold your bones remembered them. The day often started before sunrise because animals don't care about your REM cycle, and neither did the cold. Step outside to the byre or the yard too fast, and your breath punched the air like a ghost. Step back in, and your house might still feel colder than your neighbour's attitude. To put the chill in context, we whine today when the thermostat dips under 65 degrees Fahrenheit. Medieval winters in parts of Europe routinely pushed toward bone-stinging lows. Some historical accounts put places like England or northern France near 0 degrees Fahrenheit. That's cold enough to freeze your boots to the ground if you dawdle, which, yes, happened. And if you think your morning alarm is rude, imagine waking up with a dusting of frost on your eyebrows. Some writers of the time actually noted it. Nothing says, "good morning," like scraping ice off your face. Let's talk sleeping arrangements, because this is where modern comfort really parts ways with medieval reality. Beds for common folk weren't carved masterpieces with curtains. They were heaps, literal mounds of hay and straw thrown together on the floor. On paper, that sounds like the world's worst DIY hack. In practice, it worked better than you might expect. Archaeology suggests these hay mattresses could be 2 feet thick. Picture a king-sized cushion made of summer fields and harvest leftovers. That thickness mattered. Peasant houses usually had dirt floors, and dirt in winter becomes a freezer plate. Lift yourself off that with a big pile of hay, and you're already halfway to not shivering yourself awake. Families planned for this. During summer, they set aside extra bundles specifically for winter bedding. Layered thick, the hay created air pockets, nature's bubble wrap that trapped warmth and slowed the cold creeping up from the ground. People weren't just sleeping on hay either. They added whatever they had. Ragged clothes, worn blankets, dried moss. On especially vicious nights, they rotated in fresh, fluffier hay, because once it got compacted, it lost a lot of its insulating magic. Now, the trade-off. Hay is a champ at trapping warmth and moisture. Medieval winters were damp, houses were smoky, and ventilation was more art than science. Your hay bed got musty. If you had allergies, tough luck, no antihistamines at the village apothecary. There are stories of nobles forced by circumstance to bunk with peasants for a night, and then sneezing their reputations away for a week. And because those hay nests were, well, inviting, you never quite knew what you'd shake out in the morning. Mice liked the vibe. Little insects did too. One cheerful anecdote even mentions a chicken laying an egg in a bed while its owner slept. Breakfast in bed took on a whole new meaning. Here's the other funny detail. Beds doubled as seating. If anyone visited, which wasn't exactly constant in the bleak season, you all plopped down on the hay piles and chatted, medieval beanbag style. Uncomfortable? Depends on your threshold for pokey stems. But there was an unexpected upside compared to modern mattresses. Bedbugs prefer fabric to hay. So while hay had its own critter concerns, it dodged some of ours. Still, a warm bed only gets you so far. The real winter armor was clothing, and in this world, wool was the superhero cape. Not for fighting crime, but for beating hypothermia. Peasant life revolved around wool the way modern life revolves around Wi-Fi. Families might collectively own 20 pounds of wool garments. Imagine carrying a squirmy toddler made of sweaters everywhere you go. Scratchy toddler? Sometimes, yes. Getting that wool onto a back wasn't quick. Come spring, the sheep were shorn. Peasants bought, bartered, or otherwise acquired the raw fleece. Then came the time sink. Cleaning, carding, spinning, and weaving. If you've ever complained about laundry day, imagine your laundry being born as a sheep and then needing 3 different crafts to exist as a shirt. There was a perk, though, lanolin. Medieval wool wasn't scrubbed to glossy dryness. Some of the sheep's natural oil stayed in the fibers, making the fabric water-resistant. It also meant that in the rain you smelled faintly like, well, sheep. But the droplets beaded and rolled, and dry is warm. And before anyone asks, no, they didn't wash wool often, especially not in winter. Wet wool in freezing air turns your coat into a crunchy sculpture. One story tells of a man who washed his coat in winter, hung it, and watched it freeze so solid it stood upright on its own. After that, his neighbours had a new joke. Stiff as John's winter washing. It stuck, probably longer than the ice did. Wool had enemies. Fleas loved it. So people smoked their clothes. Not like a brisket exactly, but close. Garments were hung where the fire's smoke could drift through them. It helped chase off pests, and bonus added a kind of weatherproofing layer. The downside: everybody ended up smelling like a sheep that had recently camped. But the function mattered more than the fragrance. Modern tests tell us wet wool can stay about 80% as warm even when soaked. Medieval folks didn't run lab trials. They just trudged through sleet in layer after layer and noticed they didn't die. Speaking of layers, we need to talk medieval fashion, because it was less about looking sleek and more about not becoming a popsicle. If there was a style motto, it was, if you can still move your arms, add another layer. Archaeology and period accounts suggest that on brutal days, a peasant might wear 4 to 7 layers. Yes, 7. Imagine raiding every line of laundry in your village and then rope belting the results to your waist. Here's how the ensemble stacked up. First layer, linen. A long shirt often down to the knees because linen breathes and keeps scratchy wool from chewing your skin alive. Then a wool tunic. Then another wool tunic. Variety isn't the point here, air pockets are. On top of that, a jerkin, the sleeveless jacket you see in old manuscripts. And if fortune smiled, a fur-lined cloak to seal the deal. All of it was cinched with a belt or cord, more to keep things from drifting apart than to make a silhouette. Getting dressed could become slapstick. One account claims a man got so tangled his wife had to roll him across the floor like a barrel until he slipped free. If you've ever wrestled skinny jeans after a hot shower, you get the vibe. The layering wasn't just instinct, it's heat physics. Multiple thin layers trap more warm air than one thick one. Medieval people learned this through a lot of trial and error, plus accident, observation, and probably a concerning number of numb toes. Kids got the marshmallow treatment most of all. Parents swaddled them so thoroughly they waddled like chubby penguins. A wry writer of the period joked you could spot winter children by the way they rolled downhill because their knees wouldn't bend. Of course, layers created one major complication: bathroom breaks. Picture it. You, 7 layers deep, eyeing the outhouse in the wind. Many simply drank less during the day to avoid the ritual of unwrapping and rewrapping themselves in a frigid gust. Not healthy, but practical. And yes, sometimes nature called while snow pelted sideways and that outhouse looked like a dare from the universe. When the sun finally hauled itself into the sky, you still hadn't outsmarted the cold you'd just negotiated a draw. The real fight happened inside the house, around the fire. And fireplace is a generous word. Most peasant homes had a central fire pit, 3 feet wide, ringed with stones, with smoke deciding its own route. Chimneys were rare in simpler dwellings for much of the era. The smoke tried to escape through a hole in the roof, but storms pushed it right back down, meaning your living room smelled a bit like someone was smoking a ham forever. Warmth? Only about a fraction stayed in the room. The rest streamed out with the smoke, and frequently, the snow fell right back through the same hole. Congratulations, you've invented an open-plan heating system that heats the yard. Fuel wasn't store-bought logs neatly stacked by a rustic Pinterest porch. You burned what you had: twisty branches, knotty roots, the broken handle from last year's hoe. In a rough winter, wood scarcity turned creative. There are village records of whole abandoned barns, disappearing, board by board, into home fires. The local law did not appreciate impromptu deconstruction projects, but frozen people get persuasive with crowbars. And every morning you had a mission: keep one ember alive overnight under the ash, or face a frosty trek to borrow a coal from a neighbour. One tale tells of a man sprinting home with a single glowing coal inside a hollowed turnip. He ran so fast to keep it lit that bystanders swore demons chased him. So yes, medieval winter demanded stubbornness, hay ingenuity, wool wisdom, and a sense of humour tough enough to laugh at frozen laundry. And all of that was only sunrise to mid-morning. Next, we'll step deeper into the daily grind. How people fought the smoke that cured their lungs like bacon, the perpetual stew that simmered week after week, and the unexpected roommates that bleated, oinked, and clucked their way into the family heating plan. Let's pick up at the hearth, where survival played out one smoky breath at a time. A peasant fireplace was usually a shallow pit, a few stones, a soot-streaked ceiling hole, and a lot of wishful thinking. The smoke did its own thing. Some days it drifted lazily upward and out. Other days it curled down the rafters, slithered along the roof beams, and filled the room like grey soup. It stung eyes, scratched throats, and left everyone smelling like the inside of a smokehouse. But here's the twist. That same smoke also did a few useful jobs. It kept insects at bay, dried the timbers, and left a protective coat of soot that helped preserve wood from rot. You wouldn't recommend it to your contractor, but for a house battling damp winters, the side effects mattered. Managing that temperamental fire became a winter-long puzzle. Families banked coals at night by burying them in warm ash, coaxing a deep, slow glow to last until dawn. A good bank meant heat and breakfast without a shivering relight. A bad bank meant cold fingers and a reluctant trek to borrow a coal. People developed rituals around the flames. Some whispered to the hearth as they fed it, a superstitious nudge to luck and oxygen. Others arranged their fuel in careful patterns to make embers last longer. There were even household roles. Someone skilled at kindling, someone patient with damp sticks, someone who knew exactly when to lift the pot chain so the stew wouldn't scorch. Fuel was always the tight barrier between comfort and misery. Dry firewood was coveted, not guaranteed. Folks burned brush, roots, reed bundles, even brittle fencing when the snow piled too deep. If a windstorm knocked a limb off a lord's tree, peasants collected it fast, eyes peeled for watchmen. In the worst years, abandoned buildings became winter gold mines. You could measure the severity of a season by how many empty sheds looked gnawed by spring, and over that needy flame hung the most important piece of kitchen gear, the pot. Not a new pot each day, but often one large iron cauldron holding what people joked was a meal older than they were. Enter the perpetual stew. Every day a ladle came out. Every day something went in. If a rabbit fell to a snare, it became meat in the mix. If roots were pulled from the cellar, they thickened the broth. If there was nothing spare, the pot simmered thinner, flavoured by memory and smoke. It sounds grim until you realise how efficient it was. A pot that never cooled, saved fuel and labour, sanitised itself with heat, and gave a family a predictable anchor in a winter without many certainties. The winter pantry ran on creativity. Root crops like turnips and parsnips were buried in sand or stashed in pits insulated with straw. Onions braided and hung under the eaves. Apples laid in careful layers, the bruised ones eaten first. When meat was available, it was salted, smoked, or both, then kept high near the rafters where the smoke curled most. Even a small hunk dropped into the pot could change morale for days. The cellar, if you had one, was as much wisdom as architecture. Slightly cool, never wet, checked weekly for rot. Everyone had tricks. Some sprinkled ashes around stored vegetables to discourage pests. Others swore by lining baskets with dried herbs that repelled mice. Herbs. If the hearth was the engine, the herb bundles were the glove box full of useful tools. Summer's abundance hung from the rafters in crisp bouquets. Savoury for flavour, thyme for coughs, mint for breath and belly, yarrow for fevers. Many were far more than seasoning. In a life marinated in smoke and draught, a sprig of something green tasted like hope. Tossed into the pot, it masked the stale edge of late winter roots. Steeped in hot water, it became a soothed throat and an easier night. Nobody had a pharmacy on the corner, so knowledge lived in heads and hands, passed from grandmothers to daughters to sons who listened closely. Mealtime often blurred with story time, work time, and the small theatre of family negotiation. Someone stirred, someone carved, someone shooed away a pawing, hopeful pig. Because yes, in many houses the barn came indoors when the frost bit deep. People didn't share space with animals because they loved chaos. They did it because animals were central heating with hooves. A cow can put off a surprising amount of heat. A couple of sheep add their own woolly warmth. Chickens contribute body heat and, if you were lucky, the occasional egg. The living room became a mild barn separated by low hurdles, half walls, or, realistically, the polite intentions of humans and the determined curiosity of animals. The barriers worked until they didn't. It wasn't idyllic. You learned to eat while ignoring a snuffling snout under your elbow. You learned to wake up when a chicken decided midnight was dawn. You learned to step carefully. But you also learned that a room full of breath and warmth felt 3 degrees kinder than an empty one. Humidity from animals and cooking made the air feel less knife-edged. And there was a hidden benefit most modern people don't think about. Animals became an alarm system. Geese take their security patrols seriously. A restless cow can warn of a storm. Even the patterns of snoring change with weather. People paid attention because the stakes were high. The house itself did a lot of the winter heavy lifting. Builders used what they had. Timber frames, wattle and daub walls, sticks woven and smeared with a mix of clay, straw and dung, and roofs layered in thatch. Drafts were enemy number one. Every crack invited the wind to visit your bones. So walls got caulked with more of that sticky daub mixture. It wasn't pretty, but it worked. Tests on reconstructed houses show how much heat leakage a good smear could stop. Doors usually faced away from the worst wind, and were sometimes tucked behind a small dogleg entry, a windbreak you squeezed around before you reached the main room. Snow piled there instead of in the middle of your floor. Some of the smartest winter cheats involved the ground itself. In colder zones, part of the house might be dug down a few feet. Earth is steady. A few feet below the surface, the temperature holds closer to mild, not wild. Build half sunk, and the room keeps some of that steady calm. Windows, where they existed, were small for a reason. Large openings were drafts wearing invitations. Better to let in a modest cone of daylight and keep your heat. As for roofs, thatch wasn't shabby. It was genius. Thick, springy layers trapped air and shed water. Snow blanketed the roof, and instead of melting fast, it insulated like a quilt. Sometimes grass took hold up there, not because anyone planned a garden, but because life sees an edge and tries it. Goats noticed too, which led to the occasional aerial grazing adventure. Surviving outdoors demanded gear. A winter toolkit didn't look like a sports catalogue, but it was curated with care. A heavy, wide, wooden shovel for moving dense snow. A stout staff for uneven ground and for testing drifts. Reed or brush brooms to sweep paths before they packed to ice. Mittens beat gloves because fingers keep each other warm. People stuffed mittens with moss or feathers for extra insulation, and if you had a spare scrap of wool, it went into foot wraps. Thick socks were not trivial. In some markets, a good pair cost as much as a chicken. If you got rabbit fur knitted into the layers, you bragged a little. You walked easier. Navigation mattered when the world turned white. Villagers planted tall sticks along common routes before storms, each yard a guidepost when landmarks disappeared. Bright berry dyes marked some sticks, so they stood out in grey squalls. If you think that sounds like a homemade GPS, you're not wrong. The simplest markers can mean the difference between home and a night lost in a field that looks like everywhere. Weather prediction came from watching the world breathe. Clouds with bellies like iron meant snow. A ring around the moon whispered cold. When cows got restless indoors, someone bowed to the hearth and fetched more fuel. When pigs pulled extra straw, you tightened your cloak. The sky was a teacher you had to read daily. So the winter day braided together a dozen small expertises. Tending a sulky fire without wasting fuel, keeping food safe and edible without a fridge, building and patching a home that resisted wind and water, and borrowing body heat from everything that shared your roof. None of it was glamorous, all of it was skilled. And while the cold pressed in, the routines pressed back. Stir the pot, check the banked coals, shake the bedding, sweep the ash, mend the draft, tie the scarf, calm the cow, hush the rooster, sip the herb tea, tell the story. Do it again tomorrow. We haven't even stepped into chores beyond the hearth yet. Next, we'll follow the morning out the door to the byre and the yard. See how workdays were reshaped by frozen ground, why water could be more precious than bread, and how villages learned to help each other when the world outside went steel, grey and hard. Step outside the door, and winter stops being a backdrop and becomes the boss. The first job is almost always animals. You don't milk a cow on a whim. You do it on clockwork. Even if the clock is a pale strip of dawn and your fingers feel like wooden pegs. The byre, or lean-to, is colder than your breath and warmer than the yard, because animals themselves are radiators. You learn to move quickly, not noisily spook a cow, and you'll be mopping spilled milk with a frozen rag. Feed first, then water. Hay is money in flake form, and your stack has to last until spring. You become an accountant of fodder. How much did Daisy chew yesterday? How much trampled into bedding? How much can you spare today with snow still stacked on the fence posts? Water is harder than food in deep winter. Streams crust over. Wells skim with ice. You chip. You lift. You haul. Every bucket feels 3 times heavier in cold air. You guard clean water like treasure because you're not just drinking it, you're cooking, washing, steeping herbs, and watering beasts that can't go a day without. In some villages, people kept a water fire, a small flame tucked near the well or a sheltered corner, to melt ice before it thickened. Others broke ice on the same stream every morning, stamping a path with boots until the routine was carved into the banks. On desperate mornings, snow got boiled for a pot of thin soup. It's not efficient, snow is mostly air, but when you need liquid, you do what you must. With the animals fed, you scout repairs. Winter finds flaws like a picky neighbour. Drafts sneak in along the beam where last summer's daub has cracked. You smear on a fresh paste of clay, straw and dung. Yes, dung is part glue, part sealant and part... Don't ask, it works. You set your shoulder against a door that swells on damp days. You climb a ladder to tamp a thatch slip with a springy mallet, pushing stalks back into place where the wind lifted them. And you keep an eye on ash. A hearth spits without warning. Thatch burns like a dry book. Many houses kept water jars ready just for embers, and kids learned early to spot a smoking fleck and slap it out with a broom. If the day is fair, winter fair, not summer fair, you head to the fields. You won't be sowing, but you'll be living with consequences of what you sowed months ago. Hedges need trimming, ditches clearing, so meltwater in spring doesn't turn your plots into ponds. You mend fence posts with spare rails and stubborn will. You visit the grain stack, knock ice crust off the outer layer, and make sure rats haven't devised a new loophole in your defences. A good cat is worth its weight in grain. So is a terrier with attitude. You spread straw across the slick path between house and byre. Broken hips are not a medieval joke. Chores fold around daylight like origami. The sun stumbles up late and starts down early. You learn the art of not wasting steps. On your way to the well, you chip ice from the trough. On your way back, you bring the bundle of sticks you stashed under the hedge. Roots become efficient loops. If you forget one task, you pay for it with a second trip across the wind-racked yard. You only make that mistake a few times before the wind trains you better than any teacher. Community matters more in winter than in July. When roads are sludge or glass, you share what you can reach. A neighbour's cow has calved early. You bring clean straw, hot water, and a story to calm the anxious. A widow's fence collapses in a gale. You show up with a mallet and 2 rails. Table talk at night keeps track of who needs help and who can give it. Not all charity runs through a church box. Most runs through hands and feet and a quick knock. Yes, feuds exist, old and prickly. Winter softens some shared hardship, has a way of sanding edges. Others harden because hunger shrinks patience. How villages manage that tension often decides whether the end of winter tastes like relief or bitterness. Travel is calculation, not adventure. If you must go market day, a lord's summons, a baptism you leave early, layered and mittened, with a solid staff and a good eye for sky. Before storms, people plant tall route markers along common paths, branches or poles tied with rag or berry, stained cloth. In a whiteout, that faint hint of colour can stand between you and a long, cold night in a field that looks like identical fields on all sides. Boots get stuffed with extra wool or fur. Some wrap their legs with strips of cloth to keep snow out and warmth in. And yes, mittens trump gloves. Fingers are a team sport. Separate them, and they lose. Markets shrink but don't vanish. You'll find salted fish, a stubby candle or 2, coarse salt, worth more than you think, and in lucky weeks, a clutch of eggs. Wool yarn coils like patient snakes on a stall. A blacksmith might be there, breath steaming, taking small jobs, mending a hinge, tightening a ring on a bucket. Coins are scarce. Barter hums. 2 skeins for a sack of oats. A sleeve's worth of home, spun for a bundle of kindling. News travels with traders. The only thing lighter than rumours is frost. Both settle on everyone by evening. Illness plays rough in winter. Cold homes, smoky lungs, thin stews, your defences are tireder than usual. A cough travels. The herb shelf becomes a front line. Thyme for the chest. Honey if you can spare it, elder if you laid it by. Broth solves nothing and helps everything. People knew rest mattered, even if they couldn't afford much of it. Friends drop off hot water and a spoon of something warming, then step back, nobody wants to carry a cough home. When illness turns harder, you call the midwife or wise woman, the people whose hands have felt more pulses than any book. Some cures are folk logic, some are surprisingly sharp, and some are theatre with hope stitched in. But hope is a medicine too. Hunger is the other winter wolf. If autumn was poor, winter gnaws. You stretch flour with ground peas, thicken soup with barley, and pray the last apples hold their shape. The perpetual pot gives what it can. Some days it's a whisper of flavour and salt, more ceremony than feast. You learn to eat slowly, not as piety but as trickery, give your belly time to decide it's satisfied. On feast days, the church calendar surprises you with joy. A sweet bun at Epiphany, a pot spiced with anything that still smells like summer. The rhythm of saints and seasons stitches morale when weather tries to rip it. And through it all, work at home keeps circling, spinning by the fire, mending socks, carving a new peg for the door, checking the banked coals, clearing the hearth of yesterday's ash. The pot gets skimmed. The hay mattress gets shaken, surprises tumble out, some skittering. You beat the ticks out of a blanket over the snow where the cold slows them, and you smoke a wool tunic at the rafters, driving away fleas while adding a layer of invisible armour against wet weather. The house smells like stew and smoke and wool, the perfume of survival. Entertainment isn't absent, it just dresses humbly. Storytelling flares when fuel dips. Someone recites a tale they learned from a passing peddler. Someone sings a verse that spirals, adding a line each round until the kids giggle and the adults grin into their mugs. Bone dice clack in a worn bowl. A carved board hosts a game of fox and geese. Hands keep working while mouths keep talking. That's the trick. You braid joy into labour so neither steals from the other. Faith, whether fierce or background, threads the day. Church might be a trudge through ice, but inside it's packed, breath rising like clouds under a timbered roof. The priest's Latin may wash past many ears, but the pattern is comfort. Bells anchor time. A candle lit for a sick child is heat in more than one sense. On certain days, the sense of being held in a larger story steadies people when the small local story is cold and hungry. Night hems the day fast. You bank the fire, every movement practiced. A pot of embers swaddled in ash, the iron cover nudged just so, the bigger logs arranged like guardians. If you're careful, there will be a glow in the grey hour before dawn, enough to catch with kindling. If you're unlucky, you'll be at your neighbour's door with a turnip or a cup to carry a live coal home, and you'll run like a devil's at your heels so it doesn't die on the path. And then, at last, the bed. Hay poked and fluffed, extra cloth thrown down, children cocooned until their giggles collapse into sleep. Somewhere a rooster will forget what time it island, somewhere a cow will shift and the house will creak as if it's breathing. You pull the wool to your chin and feel the stubborn heat you've gathered all day, in the pot, in the walls, in your mittens drying by the embers, in the animal warmth puddled on the far side of a low hurdle. Winter is still out there, razor cold and patient. But in here, for a few hours, your world is warmer than it was this morning. And tomorrow, you'll do the whole choreography again, only faster, smarter, with the small refinements born of fresh mistakes. Next, we'll look at work beyond the farm. How trades and crafts bent to winter's limits, the clever ways people made and mended when materials were scarce, and how a village economy kept humming like a low song under the snow. Not every winter day belonged to fields and animals. Villages were little engines of craft, trade and repair, tuned to the season like fiddles to a key. When frost locked the soil and the wind bullied the hedges flat, work turned inward into workshops, sheds and corners borrowed from the main room where light and heat were already wrangled. If summer is loud with scythes, winter hums with mallets, awls and whetstones. The blacksmith's fire was winter royalty. While most hearths coddled a meagre glow, the smithy threw a muscular orange that made snow steam outside the door. People drifted there not just for work but for warmth, gossip, and the odd thaw of bones. Iron is life in a world that breaks. Hoops on barrels, rings on buckets, nails for boards, hinges for doors, points for ploughshares. Winter is repair season. Bring in the plough that lost its bite last harvest. Rework the sickle's curve. Straighten the hook mangled by an overeager pig. The rhythm. Bellows wheeze, iron sings, hammer answers. Sparks write brief constellations that wink out before they hit the floor. Payment? Coins if you have them, but more often barter. A sack of oats, 2 skeins of yarn, a promise of help when lambing starts. The smith keeps a ledger in his head. In harsh winters, that ledger becomes an act of faith. Pay me at spring. Reputation matters, both the smith's and yours. Fail to make good too often, and your hinge squeaks a little longer next time. Down the lane, a carpenter's bench grows a drift of curls and shavings like pale snow. The carpenter's winter is mending floors that sagged, doors that swelled, stools that took too many knees. He patches tool handles, axes, mallets, scythes because wood dries and cracks when you most need it not to. He also makes small things that earn small coins. Butter paddles, pegs, trivets, spoons with handles carved into modest flourishes that prove a steady hand even when the wind moans. Offcuts become kindling, nothing wasted. A good carpenter hoards strange-shaped scraps, the way a poet hoards phrases one day. That knot of oak will solve a stubborn problem. Spinners and weavers take winter personally. If the growing season is for plants, winter belongs to thread. Spinning happens everywhere there is room for a stool. By the hearth where smoke braids the rafters, in a window nook where thin light leans in. The wheel murmurs, or the spindle twirls, and wool turns from cloud to string under fingers that know the balance of twist and tension. Weaving needs more space. A loom is a wooden animal that eats a corner of a house or claims a side of the loft. Cloth grows column by column while snow stacks on thatch outside. The fabric might be coarse or fine, but it is the difference between another layer and another shiver. If you're lucky, a dye pot bubbles now and then. Onion skins for gold, madder for red, woad for blue. Winter air carries a secret rainbow over from the weavers. Tanners and cobblers do battle with cold in their own ways. Leather stiffens in icy air, so tanners coax pliancy with oil, elbow, and patience. The smell is assertive. Villages nudge the tannery to the edge of the map where breezes can escort the perfume away. But no one complains too loudly because boots are winter's handshake with the world. The cobbler measures a foot through 3 socks, nods, and sets to work. He resoles what can be saved, patches a heel, cuts new uppers if someone bartered enough good wool or a promise of spring lamb. He also makes overshoes for deep slop, the kind you strap on and off with fingers that can't feel the buckles anymore. The mill quiets when streams slow, but it doesn't sleep. The miller uses the season to dress the stones, sharpening the furrows that grind grain into meal. He checks the flume, clears debris, tightens the leather belts, and barters for sacks that can keep damp out when the thaw comes. Milling is math and diplomacy. Who gets ground first? Who pays in grain? Who pays in kindness the miller will call in later. When the wheel turns, it turns for many kitchens at once. When it stops, people worry. A clever miller stores a little extra and becomes a winter hero when someone's bin runs empty 3 days before market. Bakers work in pulses. The oven is a weekly festival of heat, and the neighborhood organizes around it. Families bring dough on appointed mornings, marked with slashes or stamped with tokens so loaves don't get swapped. The baker manages the dance big loaves first, then smaller, then pies or pasties if anyone had meat to spare. Finally, when the oven's breath is fading, in go trays of fruit or herbs to dry, or the humble biscotti-style twice-bakes that keep without moulding. Kids hover because the baker always has ends or scorched bits that still taste like feast. Candles and light are winter's quiet industry. Tallow gets rendered when livestock is slaughtered, turning scraps into fuel for evenings that would otherwise drown in dark. Dipping candles is repetitive, warm work. Up, down, cool, a rhythm children can help with. Beeswax, if you can get it, smells like sunshine caught in a hive, and church eats most of it. Little domestic hacks spread across villages, shells used as shallow lamps, rushes peeled and dipped as rushlights, polished pots set as reflectors to double a flame's reach. The poor learn that one good candle in the right place beats 3 in the wrong ones. Ale and small beer are winter's liquids of choice, safer than water and smoother than frostbite. Brewing is both recipe and rescue operation. You malt barley by spreading it until it sprouts, then drying it near the fire, praying you don't scorch the sugar right out. You sparge and boil and watch the foam with a brewer's superstitions. Some households brew for themselves. Others turn it into side trade, their doors marked on market days by a sprig over the lintel. Payment can be a halfpenny or a handful of beans. Peddlers learn the best brewhouses the way birds learn berry bushes. Guilds matter more in towns than tiny hamlets, but even villages feel their ripples. Standards drift out with travelling craftsmen. How many threads per inch counts as decent cloth? How a knife's tang should seat in a handle? What a fair weight for a loaf is when grain is dear. Rules keep cheats honest and give outsiders a way to recognize quality. Apprenticeship is winter school, hands-on, relentless, wrapped in scolding and pride. A boy or girl learns to sweep first, sharpen next, then actually touch the work. A master knows winter is the time to teach patience. Summer's rush hides sloppy habits. Winter exposes them. Money is thinner when roads ice over, so debt and duty weave tighter. Rents in kind come due. A measure of grain, a stack of firewood owed to a lord, a week's labour to mend his hedge or fetch his timber. Corvée days, those, you owe me this. Work days tend to happen when fields won't claim your body from dawn to dusk. Villagers mutter, then show up. Not because they love authority, but because the law is as real as weather, and twice as hard to dodge. The church tithe hums in the background 1/10 when you can, a promise when you can't. The priest knows who's lying. He also knows who fed a neighbour quiet-like, and he remembers that come spring, travelling sellers, packmen with boxes, tinkers with pans to mend, saltmen with precious crystals slide in between storms like starlings between gusts. They fix the pot with a clean hole you've been avoiding, swap a ribbon for a length of twine, sell needles so sharp they feel like magic after your last dull thorn. Their news is often worth more than their wares. A road flooded 2 miles north, a fair postponed, a rumour of wolves, a birth in the next parish. Information is winter currency. Fairs still happen, pegged to saints' days that refuse to move for weather. Candlemas feels like a lantern held up against the year's shoulder. A quick market for waxen wicks, salt fish and sweet buns if anyone still has sugar left from autumn. You trudge there for a dozen reasons, and return with 3 that made sense, and 6 that were impulse. But one of those might save a fence post in March, or keep your child dry in sleet. Winter purchases are bets placed on later. Repair culture isn't a slogan. It's oxygen. Everything gets a second life if your hands are skilled enough. A cloak too thin becomes a blanket lining. A cracked pot becomes a planter for spring onions by the door. A ladder with one broken rung gets shortened and lives again as a milking stool. Iron scraps get gathered in a tidy bucket to hand to the smith. Wood shavings become nest lining for hens. Even broken sledges lend runners to makeshift hand drags for hauling water or wood over ice-slicked paths. Transport itself shifts. Wheels sulk in ruts. Sledges smile. A simple sledge with a rope can turn a back, breaking carry into a glide if the path is tamped and cold. Farmers groom lanes with bundled brush, dragging it back and forth to pack snow for pulling loads. If you're lucky enough to live near a frozen river, you learn the grammar of ice, the groans that warn, the clear blue that holds, the milky white that lies. Children learn that grammar first with cautious games on the safe shallows, while adults watch with a boot ready to hook and haul, and the day still refuses to give extra minutes. Light is a coin you spend carefully. A craft that needs sharp eyes moves near the window at midday. A job that needs heat nests by the hearth after dusk. The smart old folks schedule their aches. Heaviest lifting when the sun peaks, fine work when the room warms, storytelling when nothing else can be done without wasting fuel. Under all of this, a village economy hums like a low song you only hear when everything else quiets. It hums in the smith's ledger, the baker's peels, the weaver's shuttle, the miller's measured sacks, the cobbler's bench, the brewer's tubs. It hums in the habits that turn scarcity into choreography. And it hums in the stubborn belief that if you make, mend, and share enough, the cold will blink first. Next, we'll shift from work to the textures of daily life under snow. How people courted and married in the dark months, the games and rites that cut through gloom, and the way law and custom kept a fragile peace when hunger and cabin fever sat too close by the fire. Daily life in winter wasn't just toil and repair, it had rhythms of community, ritual, and even romance tucked inside the long cold. When daylight shrank and chores pressed close to the hearth, people looked for ways to make the dark bearable. Sometimes that meant play, sometimes prayer, sometimes the subtle dance of courtship lit by candles and gossip. Let's start with gatherings. Winter evenings were the prime time for storytelling. With fuel precious and work stitched to daylight, the hours after supper were for voices and memory. Stories could be local, who saw what in the market, what omen was spotted in the sky, or they could be older, inherited from grandparents and carried across villages like seeds in a pocket. Fables taught by repetition, romances embroidered with each telling, legends that put the familiar landscape into grander context. around the hearth, laughter or shivers stitched a family closer than any blanket. Music had its place too. Not harpsichords or lutes for peasants, but fiddles, flutes carved from bone or reed, simple drums and voices. Work songs became play songs in the evenings. Some verses were practical timing a task, keeping children awake through a slog. Others leaned toward the bawdy, a splash of humor against the winter grey. Dancing could happen in cramped spaces, a line shuffle or circle with claps and stamps. A cleared barn or church porch might host larger frolics when weather allowed. Games filled the smaller spaces. Dice carved from bone rattled in bowls. Boards for nine men's morris or fox and geese scratched into wood or clay gave strategy a stage. Children made their own amusements, sliding on frozen ponds, hurling snow clods, fashioning dolls from scraps. Even in bleakness, play hummed. It wasn't frivolous. It was practice in patience, resilience, and shared joy. Romance didn't hibernate either. Winter was a season of gatherings, feast days, church services, communal baking or brewing. In those moments, eyes met across pews or loaves. Families might whisper about dowries or suitable matches. Courtship was public, careful, often practical, but still human. A boy might slip a girl a token, a spun ribbon, a polished button, a carved spoon handle. A girl might return a favor with a song verse or a dance shared at a feast. Winter nights with long storytelling gave young people chances to sit near, to talk while elders' eyes softened with fatigue. Marriage contracts often solidified in winter, aligning with the church calendar. Weddings might be modest in icy months, fewer guests could travel. Food was scarcer, but they still held symbolic weight. Warmth, fertility, survival. All themes echoed in vows made while snow hushed the fields. A simple ring of iron, a loaf split, a blessing under a smoky roof, such rituals mattered as much as summer's abundance. Law and order had their own winter flavor. Disputes didn't stop when frost came. If anything, hunger and confinement sharpened tempers. Village courts or manor halls still heard cases. Theft of firewood, quarrels over grazing rights, accusations of shirking communal duties. Justice could be swift and rough. A thief might be fined in grain, a fence breaker ordered to mend double, a liar exposed in front of neighbors. The point wasn't just punishment, it was keeping fragile peace when survival depended on cooperation. No one could afford feuds too deep. The cold was enemy enough. Religion structured winter like a spine. Advent and Christmas brought relief. Epiphany, a sparkle of light in darkness. Candlemas, the first flicker of spring hope. Services were both spiritual and social. A chance to see neighbors, exchange news, show off a new cloak, or discreetly size up a potential spouse. Processions, carols, and feast foods, however, plain lifted morale. Even fasts had function, stretching food supplies while channeling hardship into meaning. Cabin fever was real, though they didn't call it that. Weeks of snow, short days, crowded rooms friction built. Families managed with routines, with storytelling, with small crafts that kept hands too busy to quarrel. Some built little competitions. Who could spin more wool? Who could carve the smoothest spoon? Who could recite the longest ballad without stumbling? Humor was survival. A good joke could vent tension better than a shout. Chroniclers sometimes note winter pranks, swapping someone's boots with frozen ones, hiding a neighbor's shovel, or training the household goose to nip ankles at the worst time. Mischief reminded people they were alive. Children bore winter's squeeze with less patience, but even they adapted. Bundled like waddling turnips, they played tag in the snow until their laughter turned to steam. They listened wide-eyed to ghost stories by firelight, stories that explained bumps in the night as spirits or omens. And they absorbed skills at a pace faster than summer. Spinning, weaving, carving, fetching, tending embers. Winter was classroom as much as cage. Underlying all of it was the reality of hunger. Games, songs, and rituals were also distractions, ways to stretch morale as thin as stew. People measured the winter in markers, the last of the apples, the emptying of the salt barrel, the day when new lambs hinted at survival beyond the snow. They knew famine was never far. History kept those scars visible. Community rituals, shared meals, feast days, tithes redistributed were safety nets woven from belief and habit. And then there was weather itself, the constant third player in every plan. A storm could erase paths, isolate homes, or force travelers to shelter for days. Villages learned to be flexible, to fold strangers into their routines. Hospitality wasn't just kindness, it was insurance. Today's guest might be tomorrow's rescuer when your own kin is stranded. Inns in larger towns stayed alive on this principle, but even peasants kept a space for unexpected visitors, however cramped. Winter also carried superstition more keenly. Long nights invited imagination. The creak of rafters might be spirits. The glow of foxfire in the woods meant omens. Dreams were retold as prophecies, particularly when hunger blurred reality. Midwinter was believed to be thin between worlds. Customs and charms tried to guard families against ill fortune. Hanging herbs, marking doors with chalk, muttered blessings over embers all gave a sense of control when control was rare. So life under snow was a balance. Labor and leisure, faith and fear, hunger and hope. It was held together by habit, by custom, by the unglamorous but stubborn determination to see another spring. And in that balance, communities didn't just survive, they wove culture, memory, and connection strong enough to last centuries. Next, we'll step into the wider picture. How lords and nobles weathered winter differently from peasants, what castle life looked like under frost, and how privilege shaped survival when stone walls and stores of grain could mean the difference between feast and famine. Step through the snow-dulled gate of a castle and you feel at once. Winter hits differently on the high ground. Wealth doesn't melt the cold, but it changes how the cold is managed. Stone walls hold their own weather. They buffer wind and bully drafts into corners, yet they also drink heat like thirsty giants. Privilege meant you started the season not at empty but with full barrels, loaded larders, cords of wood, and a small army of hands to keep the machinery of comfort running. That cushion could be the width between inconvenience and catastrophe. In a great hall, winter plays on a larger stage. Fires here are feasts for flames, hearths wide as wagons, fueled by whole tree trunks split and wrestled into place. Smoke exits through proper vents or early chimneys that nobles adopted long before peasants. Even then, the room glows more than it bakes. Heat gathers near the blaze and drops off fast beyond it. Tapestries aren't just decoration, they're insulation, woolen walls that blunt the chill licking through stone. Floors wear rushes or woven mats. Benches and trestles pull closer to the glow on coldest nights, while alcoves and dais seats are prized not just for status but for warmth. Servants are winter's real infrastructure. Pages keep kindling stacked. Grooms drag in logs heavy enough to defeat a single back. Cooks coax heat from banked coals long before dawn. The castle's rhythm is choreographed to never let the fire die. When a host of people shares one roof noble family, retainers, guests, steward, guards, kitchen crew, the logistics of heat, light, food, and cleanliness become a constant campaign. The steward is both quartermaster and strategist, checking grain levels, rationing fuel, rotating tasks, and planning hunts or procurement runs between storms. Food, while richer than a peasant's pot, still bows to season. Salting, smoking, pickling, and drying are the backbone. Whole fish stacked in barrels of salt, sides of pork hung from hooks in cool chambers, wheels of cheese aging under watchful noses. This is edible time travel, turning summer and autumn into winter survival. Spices stretch further here. Pepper, cinnamon, ginger, cloves, costly heat that works on the tongue and the imagination. A lord might brighten a bleak week with a spiced pottage or a pie studded with dried fruit hoarded since Michaelmas. A cook with reputation can engineer morale. Bread remains law, even in castles. The bakehouse hums on a schedule tight enough to provision many mouths, with coarse loaves for servants and finer white manchet bread for the upper table. Ale flows, but wine stalled in casks from last trading season adds a different warmth when roads are passable and merchants can reach the gate. Monks and friars, often guests or suppliers, trade their own winter currencies, good ink and better news. Hunting doesn't vanish under snow, it shifts. Deer become rarer quarry near home. Boar, if foolish or hungry enough, blunder within range. Nobles ride out when weather permits, cloaks snapping like banners, dogs leaping, horns brassy and brave against the cold. It's sport and supply. A winter kill means meat fresh enough to make the hall buzz. Falconry, too, continues where game lingers, its pageantry a bright thread stitched across grey days. But winter riding courts risk ice-slick tracks, skittish horses, and the cruel math of a broken limb miles from the gate. Even privilege can't bargain with that. Comfort breeds ceremony. A noble winter is dense with ritual. Formal meals staged like theatre, carols and mummers at Christmas, the distribution of alms on saints' days, the ritual entry of guests with their entourage trailing breath and snow. Hospitality is both generosity and politics. A warm welcome to a neighbouring lord in January might translate into help when your bridge needs timber in March. Gifts circle. A bolt of cloth received, a gilded cup given, a basket of early forced greens from a warmed frame sent to a friend's hall, to remind you spring remembers us. Yet the castle's abundance is not a world apart. It rests on the countryside's back. Rents in grain, honey, poultry, and labour flow in precisely when peasants feel the pinch hardest. Corvée days to mend the lord's hedges, haul his timber, or dig his fish pond occur when fields give a brief pause, but families at home could use every warm body. The manor court still sits inside, not on the green sorting disputes, taxing patience. Ideally, good lords modulate demands when weather is savage and larders thin. Reputation, church pressure, and sheer pragmatism all argue for leniency. A harsh lord can wring one winter's due and find himself with empty fields next year because families fled. Castles were hospitals and shelters in crises too. Doors opened to travellers trapped by sudden storm, to merchants whose wagons foundered, to messengers frost-burned and half senseless. A stable bay cleared for a farmer, and child lost in a squall becomes the story that sells loyalty better than a charter ever could. In plague winters or fever seasons, the same crowded halls became liabilities. Disease loves warmth and gatherings. The infirmary room, the herb chest, the physician's looped vials, these tools mattered as much as weapons. Then there's siege winter's ugliest mirror for the privileged. Stone walls, stores, and discipline help. Frozen wells and blocked roads hurt. A ring of enemies in snow turns a feast into math. How many mouths? How many days of grain? Fuel becomes coin. The nice-to-have spices, sweetmeats mean little against the must-haves. Bread, salt, firewood, clean water. In a bad siege, even nobles learn peasant lessons: thin the stew, stretch the candle, sleep close, pray hard. Stone is not invincibility. It is a promise to suffer differently. Monasteries offer a third winter reality, neither manor nor hovel. Cloistered life plans for scarcity like a mathematician. Granaries are tidy, brew, and bakehouses orderly. And herb gardens mapped in patient minds, even while snow drinks the world of colour. Charity is part of the rule. Alms distributed at the gate, doles of bread and ale, to the poor on set days. The infirmera becomes winter's quiet hero, mixing syrups, decoctions, and salves, wrapping swollen joints, coaxing broth into those the cold has thinned. Monastic hospitality keeps travellers alive between market towns. The guest hall is often warmer than the world deserves. The legal and spiritual calendars hold even the great and the cloistered to the season's spine. Candlemas candles lifted in February cheat the dark. Lenten lean days arrive whether your stores are full or your cupboard is a rumour. The point isn't deprivation for its own sake. It's rhythm, a social metronome that guides many kinds of households through scarcity with a sense of shared meaning. Function matters. Fasts stretch supplies. Feasts redistribute joy. What truly divides classes in winter is not the existence of hardship but the margin for error. A peasant family can do almost everything right and still be one bad storm, one broken leg, one blight away from a hungry month. A castle can make a dozen sloppy choices and still land on its feet because buffers food, servants, space, connections catch the fall. But margin isn't immunity. A lord can misjudge a tithe, alienate tenants, or exhaust his woodlots and feel winter's fangs in the same bones, only later. If there's one thread that runs from pig-warmed cottage to tapestry-hung hall, it's choreography. Winter survival is a dance. The steps differ: banking coals in a clay hearth versus stoking a baronial fire, smoking a single rabbit versus rationing a barrel of herring. But the music is the same. Count what you have, waste nothing, learn the weather's grammar, take turns carrying the weight. Communities, whether 5 souls under a thatch or 500 behind stone, thrive when that dance is learned and shared. And there's the stubborn human habit of weaving beauty into necessity. A hay mattress gets fluffed and, suddenly, a child declares it a ship on a stormy sea. A cook scratches a star on a loaf destined for the lower table. A spinner hums a tune that makes the wheel seem faster. A lord lets minstrels sing a song older than his crest during the bleakest week and finds his hall warmer for it. The cold doesn't applaud, but it does, occasionally, back off a step. By the time the light begins its slow return, when icicles drip like clocks and lambs test their wobbly legs, everyone is changed in ways both small and profound. Tools are sharper. Clothes are patched with stories. Ledgers carry new debts and new favours. Kids can bank a coal now without supervision. A village's gossip has hardened into a map of who stood up when it mattered. A manor's reputation has either softened or soured. The monastery's gatekeeper knows the names of travellers who would have been ghosts without a bed and a bowl. Medieval winter wasn't a picturesque season tucked into a snow globe. It was months of practiced skill and hard-won wisdom, of shared heat and rationed light, of humour used like kindling and faith like a lantern. Peasants survived by turning hay, wool, smoke, animals and earth into allies. Nobles survived by organising space, labour and stores into a fortress against scarcity, and by remembering that the fortress rested on the valley below. Between them moved traders, monks, craftsmen, and the fierce common sense of people who refused to hand the world to the cold. Spring does not erase winter, it explains it. The thaw reveals which habits held and which broke. But the people who step out into the mud are the same people who learned, in the months behind them, how to turn necessity into culture. That is the real warmth of the Middle Ages, the heat of ingenuity and community, and it lingers long after the last frost retreats from the hedge.